All right, it is 10 a.m., so we're going to get started. Let me get my camera on so everyone knows what I look like. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and just to make sure you're in the right place, my session today is Sarah the Explorer, navigating and customizing the SharePoint interface. So to get started, tell you a little bit about myself. I am currently a junior at the University of Maryland College Park. I graduated from a STEM high school program called the Science Mathematics Academy. That's in Northern Maryland if you're from my area, which is a possibility since this is a Philly Code Camp. I'm studying information science and operations management and business analytics. Some of the past experiences I've done was working with the Project Management Institute, which I'm actually doing another talk later today talking about that experience. So if you're free at 2, go ahead and go to my other talk. I also was an intern for the Northeastern Maryland Technical Council, also a junior fellow at the Library of Congress this past summer. And one I haven't included just yet because I haven't completed it yet, of course, is that this upcoming summer I'll actually be a solutions architect intern for Amazon. So that's pretty exciting. I'm big on my social media presence, so go ahead and follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. Both of them is Sarah E. Patrick. I like to post a lot of fun stuff, and all the talks that I'm up to, especially since they're all virtual now, they're all easy. So it doesn't even matter where you are. So I just assumed that everyone's from the Philly area, but you could totally be from somewhere else in the country or even the world. So go ahead, check me out on those social medias and see some other things I'm up to. One of my most proudest involvements is with a organization called TechGirlz. They're a great nonprofit dedicated to creating the spark of interest for middle school girls getting interested in tech. So I started volunteering with them back in 2016. So, oh my goodness, it'll be almost 5 years now, where we teach these hands-on workshops that are beginner level for middle school girls to get them introduced to real life examples of tech. And the first one we did was building a website with WordPress, and that was super fun, honestly. So as a new volunteer at the time, I was worried that the girls wouldn't be very interested, but they absolutely loved it. We've done many of them ever since. Game design with Kodu, what was in a computer, designing mobile apps with Marvel. There were so many topics, and there's even more on their website. So there's probably something that you're interested in that you could teach to these young girls. So if you are interested in volunteering, please let me know or follow their Twitter or their other handles. It's TechGirlz with a Z .org. Those were just some of the images of me volunteering with them and giving a speech about my work with them and my experience as a woman in tech. So they're an awesome organization. Go ahead and check them out. All right, to actually get into our talk today, I'll be talking about my work that I did with Smithsonian 2 summers ago when I worked at their office of the CIO. So in case you're unfamiliar, who is Smithsonian? So Smithsonian Institution is the world's largest museum, education, and research complex consisting of 19 museums, a national zoo, and 9 research facilities. So the background of the Smithsonian was that there's this British scientist named James Smithson, and when he passed, he left his will, all his belongings to the United States, which was weird because he had never been to the United States, and he left this quote here in his will that with his grant for the United States, he wanted it to be towards something that was shaping the future by preserving our heritage, discoursing new knowledge, and sharing our resources with the world. So that left the United States being like, that's a little ambiguous. What should we do with this man's will? So another quote from his will was that he wants an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. So with these statements, they decided to found Smithsonian Institution and to foster all the education and the history of our nation and lots of other good stuff. So that's how Smithsonian came to be. So, excuse me. You might know some Smithsonian museums. Some of the most popular ones is the Air and Space Museum, Natural History Museum, American History Museum, and the National Zoo. Most of them are in Washington, D.C., but they do have some museums, I believe, in New York and some other locations like Virginia as well. So the best part of these museums is that if you ever go to visit them, they're all free. You don't have to worry about buying any tickets. I believe now with the pandemic, they are either still closed or when they were open for a brief period of time, you had to reserve tickets, but they were still completely free. So if you're ever in the DC area or one of the other areas where one of these museums are placed, definitely go check them out. It's a great place to visit because it's free and you'll be learning so much. I have to do a little plug for Smithsonian because I really enjoyed my time there when I worked. So here's a couple links when I put out my slideshows. You'll be able to access these links as well, but they have positions for full-time as well as internships like I did. As I mentioned, I interned for the office of the CIO as a SharePoint intern. So this is me at their data center with some of my mentors, and I'm going to be talking about the project that I worked on for that summer. So the main gist of this was that I was given this organization chart, and they wanted on their internal SharePoint to make it interactive so that the other employees could get access to all the information about each unit in the Smithsonian. So the biggest missing piece of Smithsonian was that the employees knew about the sector they were working within, but they weren't sometimes familiar with all the other sectors. There were over 100 in Smithsonian, so that's a lot to keep track of. So this organization chart would now be interactive and provide important information on each Smithsonian unit, all compiled into one place. And I have a screenshot here of the interactive chart that I worked on at the time, but I'll show you what I was looking at and how, if it was redone today, what I did. So this has obviously been updated since I worked on it 2 summers ago, but we have just the PDF of the main organization chart, and then there's a few other images to show the further hierarchy. So you can see we have Undersecretary for Education, and a couple more, lots and lots of units, as you can see. So yeah, this is what it will be based on. So the goals of this interactive organization chart was to create a working image map from Smithsonian's organization chart that will use pop-up windows instead of opening a new tab or a whole new window. I'll get into more of these details in a minute. Provide the information and resources about each unit. And then for myself, I was learning more about Smithsonian as a new intern, and then developing skills in SharePoint Online, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So to get you an idea of what the end project is, let's take a quick look at a demo of what I was able to result in. So we're on our main page of the Smithsonian organization chart on SharePoint. And you can see as I'm hovering over each different box, I get an icon to click on it, and I get this nice pop-up window to result in all the information about that specific unit. I have a short description, staff listing, their intranet URL, external URL, and then maybe some other notes if applicable. We can scroll down and see a bunch of other ones. And then some of these pages, specifically these ones that are highlighted in blue, take us to a new page because it has that further hierarchy that we saw in that past PDF. So once I click on that, you can see it takes me to a new page, and now I can click on these sections to create that pop-up window that we saw before. And then we have a link to go back to the main page so that I can easily navigate back and forth between the different pages of what we saw in the PDF, and I can look at all of the different units informations staying in one window. So that's a very brief overview of how I got those to work together, and I'll be talking about how I got each part to be, and also get into nitty-gritty of the code behind it as well. So in case that you are a very beginner here, because when I started with SharePoint, I was definitely a beginner, what is SharePoint? It's a browser-based collaboration and document management platform from Microsoft. Also, it's content management system. And I have found that a lot of companies will use it as their intranet for their companies to all work together on their documents and other options to give out services to organize the company, and there's information, and there's lots of uses for it. So in this case, Smithsonian was using it for their companies dealing with documents and getting their information, such as me making this organization chart so that they can get all the information of each of the units. So getting started in SharePoint, we'll be looking, this was actually from one of my other talks, talking about just getting started of making a list and small things like that. I'm just going to show bits and pieces of this. That when we get started in SharePoint, we can create a site up at the top there. And then we have the option for either a team site or a communication site. I found that a communication site is more for just general announcements, but in this case, I want it to be interactive and be able to have edits in case one of the units want to change their information. So I'll be doing a team site in this case. We give it a site name and a site description. We can add our additional owners and members. And then we have our new site. So now we're going to add a new page. And I talk about some of the things that I ran into as a beginner. And first, oh, my mistake, I'm adding a list. So a list is actually under add an app. And because it says just add an app, I actually wasn't sure where the lists were, but really they're just under the same thing. SharePoint provides lots of different templates of the type of lists or apps that you may want, which I found really helpful. But in this case, I'm going to be showing you a custom list so you can customize the different columns you want to add in. From here, we can give it the name and start compiling our columns in the list. So now it's under our content, so I'm going to click in there and add some columns in here. This demo that I go more into in my later talk, there's many different ways to create a column. I'm just going to show this first easy way, which is just adding a column right then and there, picking the type of data type I want to be held in that column, and then same thing that we did for our other steps, giving a name, a description, checking that data type, and then a default value if needed, and making sure I hit save when I am done. So yeah, this is a very brief overview of getting started with SharePoint. I want to get into the nitty-gritty of the other things, but if you are still a beginner in SharePoint, I highly recommend checking out my other talk at 2 o'clock. So I get into more details about this. All right. So back to my Smithsonian project was first I had to do some research on each of the units. So I determined that this bullet point list of items was what was most important to include in this project. So it was the name of the unit, their abbreviation, because Smithsonian loves abbreviations, a short summary of what the unit was, a staff listing if that was available, their Prism website URL, which is Smithsonian's intranet, and then an external website URL, which was what's provided to the public. And then these are going to be my SharePoint columns. So I'm going to show you how I compiled all my research into an Excel sheet and then easily transferred that into my SharePoint site. So first you can see my large Excel sheet here with all of the information that I just discussed. I can slide over for anything else. I'm going to highlight all of my information and turn this into a table. So under design, actually not under design, it's under home, and then format as a table. It doesn't matter what it's look like, it just needs to be a table. Then under design, we go to export and then export table to SharePoint. That was really quick, so let me back up a hot sec. Design, export, and then you can drop down and it says export table to SharePoint list. So that was something that actually, when I did this talk for the first time, people were like, what? You can't do that. And I was like, yeah, you can. And when I was first introduced to SharePoint, I had actually just physically copied and pasted into SharePoint. So this is an easier way to get it right into SharePoint from Excel. So before it gets right into there, I have to make sure it's going to the correct place. So I'm putting in the link to the SharePoint site from Smithsonian. I'm giving the name of my new list and also a description as well. Now I have to double check that all of the data types are correct for each column. So you can see here, Excel is smart enough to see the pattern within each column and seeing if that's the data type we want to transfer into SharePoint. So you can see here specifically these three that are highlighted as hyperlinks. I actually didn't have the correct data type at first, because some of them, if they didn't have a link, I would type none. But then that messed up the whole column, thinking it was just text. So I made sure to go back and delete those items that said none, so it's just links, so that the SharePoint list knew that it was a link column. So this is a great way to double check that you have the correct data type in each column before you actually put it into your SharePoint list. All right, but since all mine are correct, I'm going to hit finish, and then it's going to take me to the SharePoint site. So let's go there, make sure it all looks good. And sure enough, it does. So already in a SharePoint list for me. And since it was a big, long one, that was great that it did that all for me. All right, so next was site pages. As you saw from the final demo, I wanted different pages for the different hierarchy pages that was shown in the PDF. So here you can see all the different parts that I wanted as different pages. Of course, the main homepage, what's going to be like the landing page of this whole project. And then each blue unit had a further hierarchy. So I've listed those here, so I knew how many site pages I needed. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I needed 8 pages total. So I'm going to show you how I went about that, making all those pages. So I'm just under my site contents in my SharePoint site. And there's a folder for your site pages. So I'm going to go here. And then we're going to see my existing pages if we do have any. So to create my new one, at the top there we have the plus sign with new and a drop down, and that's where we have the option to select site page. So I'm going to create that there. And then I'm going to name the page at the top here. So this will be my image map test. And then this is the same steps that I do every time I did one for each of the blue units. So repeated that 7 more times. Super easy and straightforward. So we're about to jump into the code part of this session, but just in case we still have some beginners here, I want to explain what each part of the code that I was working with is. So first is HTML, that's the standard markup language for web pages. And as I describe each of these, I have a little analogy for them. So I find HTML being the framework of a house. So it's like the walls, the floor, the wood that builds them up, the roof. It's all of the frameworks, what gives the foundation of our house here. Next, we have CSS. That's the language that describes the style of HTML documents. So in our house analogy, CSS is the paints on the wall, the decorations in the house. That's what makes it look nice, pretty, and styled. As we see in the screenshot here, what we saw before, let me actually go back to the first one, we have just the text. This is a heading, this is a paragraph. Now we have the background being blue and the different fonts of the text and the different sizes of the text as well. Lastly, we have JavaScript, and that's the programming language of HTML and on the web. For our house analogy, this is what makes the house actually working. Does it have electricity? Does it have water? Do we have a stove that can cook? Can the doors open and close? Giving it dynamic functionality to it. So back in our screenshots, now we have a button that we can click on, and it displays the date and time. So making it interactive and dynamic for our users. Now that we've gone over all these basics of the code, where can we see this code? Because I'm going to be showing you a lot of it. I don't expect you to write it down really quickly or type it up. So I'm making sure that you have access to it. I forgot to include this slide. If you want more introduction on what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is, all of this is on W3 Schools. I find this as a really helpful tool when learning new languages or just getting reminders, tips, and tricks of each coding language, and there's much more than just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as well. So back to where you're going to access my code, I have it hosted on GitHub. If you don't know what GitHub is, that's a code hosting platform for version control and collaboration. I've used this many times for my school projects. There's so many capabilities of what it says, version control, and then having branches to show who's contributed what. Lots of good stuff. So my GitHub page, my username is SCP890, And you can find the code I'm about to talk about under image map in SharePoint. So if you do want to use what I'm talking about today, it references it there. So now that we've covered all that background, let's jump into the nitty-gritty. So first, we want to talk about what is an image map. So it's a list of coordinates relating to a specific image created in order to hyperlink areas to different destinations. And those little areas are known as hotspots. So that was my first goal when creating this project, because I wanted to be able to see the one PDF image, hover over the unit I wanted to know about, and be able to click on it to get that information. So that's my destination that I want from that hotspot. So setting up the image map code, we have the first line here where we're creating the map, we give it a name, and then ID. So my yellow text here is what you would edit for whatever you have. Everything else can be probably the same. I'll talk about more of the hotspot code in a second. That would go here. It's just commented out as a note. And then the actual image to indicate where we're looking at. So the whole image being the PDF screenshot, we give that an ID, an alternative text for the image. So if there's a problem with it loading, it'll display that text instead. The actual link to the image, and then looking at the map name because we want to connect it to the map so that we can create those hotspots. Then the actual hotspot, we have an area title, and then when we do on click, it will bring up the link here, so the href equals the whatever the link is, and then we indicate the coordinates that creates that actual hotspot. This window.open is highlighted in purple because that has some edits depending on what we want to do specifically with that area, whether it's on that click we are getting that pop-up, or if it's taking us to the new page if it has further hierarchy. So I'll get into that. So looking at this all together, I know this might be a little bit overwhelming, but remember it's on GitHub, and this is just to show you what my end result was. I have a title saying that this is a Smithsonian organization chart. I gave it a map name and then many different area titles. So this was repeated many times. This one specifically for the Board of Regents area. And then I have my specific link for the information about the Board of Regents, which was another part of my SharePoint. That's what I showed you in the list. And then also the coordinates I had created to get that specific point. And then the overall image, this is the screenshot of the PDF, is listed down here. I believe that I'm just double checking that I didn't skip a demo, because sometimes I have done that in the past with this talk. So how do I get this all into SharePoint? I used a modern script editor that Smithsonian already had installed. Unfortunately, unless there's been an update since the last time I've used this, there was no script editor web part for the modern SharePoint Online, modern version of it versus the classic. But there is a way to get it in there. So here's another GitHub link and the instructions to have a created script editor for the modern SharePoint that you can put in yourself. So now let me show you how I use that modern script editor to get all those pieces into SharePoint. So first I'm on that site page that I had just created. I'm clicking this plus sign to add a web part. So this modern script editor acts as a web part. So there I see it there as labeled as SI modern script editor. And I'm going to edit the snippet. So this is where all of my code is going to go. So I'm going to insert the code there. Oh, and that was it for this part. I think I go into more detail in another demo about how it actually shows up. But that's how you actually get the script editor into your SharePoint. And then I'll show you where the code goes when we get to there. So first we have to actually get those images so we have a link to refer to before we put that code into the script editor. So let's see how I got those images and placed them into SharePoint so that I have a convenient link to go to. So I simply just use my snipping tool and I click new and I do a little cut of the area that I want of the PDF. And then I go to save that, copy it first, but I'm saving it to SharePoint. So the way that Smithsonian had it set up, they had a flow of if I emailed this specific email, it would be saved under a SharePoint list with the attachment as one of their columns. So that's what I'm just doing here. I don't go into detail too much about this because I did not work on this part, but the point is that I need to get the image into a SharePoint list. So now that it's in there, I'm clicking on it and getting a link to it. So by opening that up, now I have this convenient link of that image. So I'm going to capture that. And now when I'm going to the code that I had pasted into my web part, so I'm clicking edit snippet again, and now we can see the code in there. There is where I'm going to replace the src for the link to the image. So I'll click save, and now I can see that image in the SharePoint site. Make sure I hit publish or republish then, and now I can see it. So that's how I'm taking all those pieces that I just discussed and putting them all together, getting the script editor into SharePoint as well as all the code and retrieving those links. So I had to do that 7 more times for each part, each site page that I created. All right. So now, how do I get those unique links for each of the units information? So it was important that when we clicked on each unit, it was just showing it the information just for that unit. That makes sense. But right now, since it was just in a SharePoint list of everything, all the information, we had to do a process to make sure we were just getting specific links for just the information of that unit. So we're going back to the list I had created from when I imported my Excel information into SharePoint. And you can see here, I'm going to click on the ellipsis right above. And you can see I have a lot of them made. And I'm going to create a view specifically for that unit that I'm creating it for. For the existing view, just to make sure I have all of them in check, I'm hitting all items. And then I'm going to create a view name for whatever unit I'm focusing on. This one's for the Office of the CIO. And under the filter is how I'm going to specifically only view the one unit's information. So I'm going to click on only show items when the unit name is equal to Office of the Chief Information Officer. So it's really important for those names to match whatever I had in the original SharePoint list. And just to make it a prettier style, I would always use the newsletter no lines, so to give it a little bit of style to my created view. So now we can see here the resulted list is just the one item. Back it up just a second. And we're going to see that now, because it's just that one item in this list, I can specifically use this link to reference to in my code. So this one's just the information about the Office of the CIO. So I'm going to go grab this link at the top here that I've now created, copy that, and now when I go back into my snippet code, the modern script editor code, these are the links I'm going to use for each hotspot area of the code. I can actually go back to show specifically what I'm talking about. So this part of the code right next to the href here, that's where I'm going to put that link that I just retrieved. All right, so now how do we get the coordinates that go into the code? So I actually used a free website called image-map.net, and this is meant to create a whole image map for you. I found that I needed some extra features to it. The code that I was originally given as like my foundation was a different Smithsonian interactive map. So I already had the structure of it. I just needed to really identify those coordinates. So instead of using this to purely make my image map, I'm using this to grab those coordinates. So I uploaded an image from the website, and that's the same link that I had used from when I took a screenshot of the PDF and then uploaded it to SharePoint. I'm using that same screenshot. That's really important so that the coordinates actually line up with each other. And then from here, I'm going to start clicking and dragging to create some boxes, and that will know what the coordinates are. So I just click 2 corners, or you can click and drag, and that's going to create each hotspot. So I'm making sure every time I do a new one, I click on Add New Area, and then click, click, and I'm doing that for each one. You can see here that I'm labeling a title for each one. This is not necessary because I'm just stealing the coordinates, but it was easier for me to read, so I knew I was corresponding the correct coordinates to the code I had as well. So now that I have each one here, I'm going to click on Show Me the Code, and it gives me each area that I've created and its corresponding coordinates. So I just took these and I copied those, and I go to my code that I already had created, click Edit, back into my modern script editor, and I just paste it into the corresponding hotspot I created. So you can see me scroll down to that correct code, and I'm going to paste in the correct coordinates here. So I just do that for each one and back and forth. So then when we are done and finished, we're just speeding through these here. I'm going to make sure to hit save so that we can check that if they apply properly. So I saved it, clicked republish. Now a quick check for me was that I just hovered over each hotspot, and if my cursor changed to a little pointer finger, that's how I knew that it was working. You can even see the text hovering over it as well. So yeah, all my hotspots are now working, and they're able to be clickable to whatever link I created for it, which was what I had shown last, the unique links for each items in the list. All right. So I talked about in the beginning that one of the goals is that I wanted to create a pop-up window instead of taking me to a new window or a new tab instead. So this required me to learn a little bit about modals. So what is that? It's a graphical control element subordinate to a main application's main window. So to me, it was a pop-up window. So instead of like an add pop-up window, it just gives as you can see the screenshot here, a smaller window within the overall window that you're in to give your information needed, and then you easily X out of it, staying within the same window, and having easier navigation overall. So this explains that as creates a mode that disables the main window, but keeps it visible with a modal window as a child window in front of it. I like that. It's like parent window and a child window. So this code I'm about to show you is also retrieved from W3 Schools. I do have it on GitHub, but if you want the raw version that I use, I got it from W3 Schools that I talked about in the beginning. Super helpful resource. So first, the design of the modal code, which is the CSS, what makes it actually look like a child window that appears in your main window. First, we have the class of modal, talking about how the display is none by default because we only want it to appear when we click on it. Some other indications to make it look nice. Again, I don't want to go into too much of these because this was provided automatically by W3 Schools, and you can investigate more of the CSS area of W3 Schools if you do want to change the look of the modal, such as the color, the width and height of it, things like that. And then we have another class of the modal content, talking about the background color and all these other indications. I know I said I wouldn't get too much into it, but in case you are wondering what margin, padding, and border is, this image here helps describe those different parts. So the margin is like the very outside area of the portion that you're creating, and then the outside of the window. Background color, image, the padding is here, border is like that small area there. So they are very small, but they are different when designing that in your CSS. Then we want a close button. So remember, because it's a child window opening up, we do want access to get out of it. So designing that close window, close button We gave it the color, which is just gray in this case. It floats to the top right corner. We give it a size if it's bolding. And then when we hover over it, it'll create that pointer, and then more things about it. So now when we get back into the HTML part of this code, we got to put all the appropriate parts in to make sure it actually applies. So this is just a comment for the modal. I create a div tag so that everything within it is looking at the modal. And then we have the modal content that it'll close. And then within this paragraph, we have an iframe, and that's what actually creates it to appear in front of the actual window. So I just named that my iframe. This is where I'm going to put the link, and then we have the width, height, and then a border as well. So now for the JavaScript part of it, because again, we want this to be interactive, I have a variable for the modal that looks at the my modal that I just created in the HTML. So remember that div ID, that's where I'm looking at there. And then also a span for the close part as well. So I'm creating these two variables to reference to when I start interacting with it. So now when the span's on click, that's when I want it to close the modal. So that's why the display will be none. And then also I give it the option that if a user just clicks outside of the modal, not on the close sign, but just outside of it, it will also close it. So same thing here, the display will be none. To actually show the modal, I created a function that looks at the link that I wanted to go to, as well as the title, and create these two variables so that when the modal is on click, so specifically looking at the hotspot I created, the iframe will be displayed. So that's how I have that all formatted here. So let's see all of that put together. I know it was a lot, but I think visualizing it will help understand how those all come together. So I'm going to go back to looking at my modern script editor. But first, I'm showing you what it originally does. So if you recall back to the purple text that said just window.open, this is what it's doing right now. Opens up a whole new window, which is not what I wanted to do. Remember, I want to make the navigation as easy as possible for my users and keep it all in one window. So because it opens a separate window, I got to go fix that. So now we're going to open up the modern script editor and fix that. So we'll do edit snippet. And I'm going to look at the code here, scroll down to the specific area I was just talking about, where it says window.open. And I'm going to change that so that it's looking at the function I just created instead. So now I'm doing show modal. So remember, I just defined that function. So now that should use all of the modal code I just discussed and apply it so that instead of opening a whole new window, it pops up in a modal. So I'm saving it and republishing it, making sure that it's all applied. So now when I click on it, I should get a modal, which I do. We can see the parent screen in the background and then the child screen in the front. So we talked about how nice that looks, but you can see that, let me back up a second, that is, we can see this extra navigation on the side and the top here. So we're going to talk about how to get rid of those. All right. Just checking that we're good on time. So these are some of the tips and tricks to get rid of those small things because we got the overall goal done, right? So just to make it a little nicer and polish all those little things. So first we want to hide that header and navigation and toolbar, all these little extra things that the user reading this doesn't need access to. So we're going to click on that to fix all of those. So we're just jumping where we left off. So now I'm going to go back into editing it, the snippet, to first get rid of the header part. And this is done by adding a little extension to the links that we're going to. So that's the link of the specific item in the list. So I'm adding the ID equals is dialog equals 1, and that just makes the header part navigation go away. So we're going to check, make sure that applied. Again, save, republish. I just want to emphasize saving republish because there's times where I would forget to do it. My SharePoint would time out, and then it wouldn't save my changes, which was pretty annoying. So now all that extra stuff has gone away, except we do have that pesky page tab. It just zipped by it, so I'm going to go back to that to show that. I click on the Board of Regents, and we can see the extra navigation, the header stuff, all that went away except that page tab. So we're going to get into that next. Additionally, we want to get that toolbar to go away. So we can see here it says plus add new item. We don't need our users to add new items. I don't even think they had the capability to do that, but we don't want that there. So I'm on that specific link that got the specific units information. And from there, you saw I hit the arrow and then edit web part. From there, that's where I can change the toolbar settings under toolbar type. Before it was full toolbar, and now I want it as no toolbar. I make sure I hit OK, so this changes actually apply, and now that plus add new item has gone away. I go stop editing to get out of that, and that part's gone too. So just cleaning up some of those extra things. The next part of hiding that pesky page tab requires some more code. So this was a little bit more difficult to get into. I created some more JavaScript functions. First was on frame refresh. So this looks at the iframe that I created that actually creates that pop-up modal. And specifically, it's looking at the S4 ribbon row. So if I go to that page and I did inspect element, that page tab was identified under S4 ribbon row. So that's why I indicate that, and then I want the display to be none. So now, under the modal content HTML code, I added another element of onload so that it looks at this function. So basically, overall, this is saying when I click on the hotspot and it's loading the page, it will make the display of that page tab to be none. However, this is different for some different browsers. So I found just that code to be great for Internet Explorer, but not to work on Google Chrome. So I had to get some of this code to first identify which browser I was currently in. So this gives you a bunch of them, more than I needed from what I was working on, but just to give you an idea of what it might be looking at. So this is looking at Chrome, Navigator, the vendor name, if it's Edge, if it's iOS Chrome, other different browsers you might be using. And then in here, I have some if statements that, oh, if it's Chrome on iOS, I didn't use this one, so I did else if, looking at those different variables just created, basically saying, oh, if it is in Chrome, I'm going to use the specific code that will help in Chrome instead. And then for the other ones, I'll just use the code that I had just shown you that will work in the other browsers. So because Chrome specifically was giving me some troubles, I had to add a set timeout for the refresh. And unfortunately, this didn't work perfectly. If the page loaded for way too long, the page tab would still show up. But I found that 800, which is 800 milliseconds, worked pretty good with timing-wise that most of the time that page tab would go away. So all of this was the same as before, but I just added this set timeout function for specifically the Chrome browser. So now I had a new function specifically for Chrome that I had to do window dot instead because Chrome needed something different, apparently, and also content document instead of just document to set those changes for Chrome. So now let's look at those and see how both of those work, make sure that both of those are applied. So right now I'm still in Internet Explorer, so I'm doing just that first part that I showed you of fixing the page tab being not displayed. So you can see that at the bottom here, this is where I've pasted all that code to identify the different browsers. And then I have the code for when it is Google Chrome here with that set timeout function. Of that show modal is now this new function. And then if it's not, like Internet Explorer, the show modal function will be what I originally had. And then we have the actual parts of removing the ribbon for each one of those. So now for the Internet Explorer part, I want to make sure to add that onload in. So I'm adding that here. And I forgot to mention that was the main problem with Google Chrome. It doesn't recognize those onloads. Make sure I save and republish every time. So now when I click on that unit in Internet Explorer, that page tab is gone. But let's also check in Chrome. So I switch to Chrome here, and it's also gone as well. Woo! A little bit more work than I anticipated just to get that tab to disappear, but we got it done. So remember, that is all pasted onto my GitHub page. The last part was, again, we wanted the navigation to be all in one window, and those units that required to take us to a new page, we wanted to be able to get back to the original page really easily. Instead of, you could hit the back navigation button in your browser, but we wanted to make it an easier option. So I just added a link that acted as our parent site button. That was just a link back to the original landing page that I want the users to go to. So another part to make this different, remember that we had to change this part of the code that's highlighted in purple from window.click to the function I created. But for the ones that went to a new site, I changed it to just location. So instead of opening up a new window or creating another modal, I'll show you how this happened. It turned into like a modal within a modal. That would just take us to the new page within the same window, open up the modal, but then be able to go back within the same window as well. Just making sure I didn't skip any of these demos again. Yes, I showed you that one. So now this one to put it all together. So first, I'm showing you that when I click on one of those current blue units that take us to another page, we have that modal within a modal. And this works, but it doesn't look great. So we're going to go fix that. I'm going to click edit my snippet, and for each hotspot that was the blue unit, I changed show modal to just location. So now it just takes us to the next page normally instead of opening up a new window and not doing that modal within a modal thing. So I fixed that. So now we're going to go check, make sure that's okay. So now it just takes us to the new page. So that is fixed. We can see here. And now I'm going to edit this snippet to add in my back to parent site code. So I created a new snippet just to make it easier for me, but you can just put it in the same snippet as the original one. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just pasting in here the back to parent site HTML code. Make sure I save that. And now we're going to see that handy link to go back to the parent site. So now I can easily navigate to this, look at the different modal and unit information here, but then go back to my main site and have all the navigation in one tab. So don't have to worry about extra windows opening and new tabs opening as well. It's all just in one singular place. All right, so that is everything that I have. Thank you all so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Please let me know if you have any questions. I will open up the chat now to take a look. And if you do think of them later, also remember to follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, Sarah E. Patrick, and you can ask me those questions there as well. But if not, have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of the conference. And yeah, have a good one. Thanks so much.